Hello again, everyone. Exceptionally, this month we have two sessions because we didn't have one in March and we feel we owe you some KQL goodies. So today we have a very special guest, Thijs Lecomte, and he will introduce himself a little bit later. But first, as usual, let's start. Yeah, that's us again. And the agenda, as usual, a big welcome. I'm very glad to see some faces appear in nearly every show. So that's really a big honor for us. So yeah, what's new or updates? I actually started to change the title because it's not always new, but there are also just updates. Then we have our guest. And as usual, what did you do with KQL this month? So about what's new or updates, for those working with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, back in November, we already heard the first update that Microsoft has been partnering with the open source project Zeek with the goal to bring more network-related data into Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And while in January, we saw the first two detections that actually leverage the Zeek engine, we also saw some schema changes coming, but now recently there has been this announcement. And yeah, I've been playing with it last night, not enough that I already can show my own stuff from it, but I definitely recommend you take a look into this and yeah, take a close look into the HTTP, FTP, SMB, SSH type of network detections.
Can I quickly jump in, Alex?
Yeah, sure.
I actually just used it today while I was hunting for an incident. What's important to know is that the information is not available in the timeline, so you really need to use KQL to get it. But it does provide meaningful insights on like what HTTP method was used and the complete URL being visited, which is extremely useful because up until now you needed proxy logs to get that, and now Defender might be bringing them as well. So it's an awesome feature, and if you haven't used it, you really, really should look into how it can help you.
Yeah. No, fully agree. I took a quick look in a live tenant on the FTP events, and until now, I mean, we could kind of find out whether we have port 21 activity. But now we can actually, to some extent, also see, the commands being executed in FTP, like the LSs and the file transfers. I haven't been able yet to narrow it down that I can tell what file actually has been transferred. I'm not even sure if that will be possible, but at least I can tell that there has been more than just port 21 activity. Plus, we no longer just have to rely on whether someone used port 21 because it's actually inspecting the network packet itself. So yeah, definitely worth taking a look. And yeah, considering nowadays world where not every device is sitting behind a proxy and a firewall, I think this is an excellent argument. When we have those discussions, like should we collect proxy logs, and that at least for those devices managed by Defender EDR, we also get a lot of valuable insights. Yeah. Good. The next topic, I already briefly mentioned this last month, but for those that paid attention, I also have mentioned that while we had several schema changes, that especially the internet-facing attribute remained empty for me, but that was simply because I was not patient enough, because apparently Microsoft introduced the attribute, but they only started to actually populate the data a few days ago. So now you can run this query, which I basically copied as well from the article. You can, of course, also do it in the UI. So in Defender 365, go to devices, set a filter to internet facing equals yes. And then you will find those devices that are internet facing. Now, to be honest, if you also look into the comment of that article, there are, of course, a number of open questions, how those devices are being identified. Especially interesting is, where the result is based on a public scan. And here, it's funny enough, I get the same questions when we speak about Defender EASM, so External Attack Surface Management. It would be interesting to understand, what type of scanners are being used, from where do they scan, because some companies actually might block those external scanners. And if we want to leverage from that information, then you might want to maybe exclude those scanners. And yeah, I had a hit. A normal laptop that has this port open, and that, of course, should be worrying because, that is maybe not good or eventually wanted. I don't know. I have to check with them. Yeah, but definitely another valuable insight that we get. Yeah.
I was just using the query, and one of my customers has a Windows 10 from an end user and has SMB open to the internet. So that's an interesting conversation we're gonna have.
Yeah. Well, I exactly have the same use case here. So that's not so cool. Yeah. Good. Who knows? Maybe it's a test machine. In production.
It's always test and development always get compromised first.
Exactly. Good. And last but not least, to be honest, is there a lot of value in this query? But, I simply pick up everything where there's KQL in it. So I also came across this article where, Microsoft basically has announced that they are rebranding or renaming the names for tracks. And if you need a translation query, then here you go. Best is you open the article because, of course, I only took a screenshot here from that. Yeah, and that's it in terms of updates. Sorry, nothing new, but I'm sure we're going to see a lot of new things in the coming months. So then let me proceed to Johnny.
Wait, we have I think a question from Jörg.
Yeah. Or is he just applauding or waving?
No, I just chose the wrong button. Sorry, I switched.
No worries. Thanks.
So
Okay.
We have a nice screenshot over here about hidden characters in your data, where we have 5 strings. And who can guess how many different strings these are?
Okay, let's make this a little bit more interactive. I'm going to give away a KQL coffee mug.
Wow. We have a winner. Andrea says 5. And that's correct. Cool. So,
yeah, get a cup of coffee. Okay, great.
So I'll share my screen. 3, 2, 1, here it is. So over here, we indeed have 5 different strings. I've made a data table with 1 column, original, which is a string, and then added these strings. And what it is, I am working on async parsers and parsing of data in general. And what happens if you split your data to columns, and sometimes you miss the leading space or trailing space, or for instance, in Barracuda logs, you have the log severity, for instance, info, and then 5 spaces, and then the computer name. So the thing is, we want to know what's the difference between our strings. Maybe you want to see if there's a leading space, a trailing space. So I started playing with my data table, and I was thinking, hey, if we add double quotes around it, or maybe another character, how many different columns would we have? So over here we have the same query, and I added extended to test. I did a string concatenation, added a double quote, and as you can see now we have 5 strings and some difference. We have one leading space, but over here we have 2 leading spaces, so it's not entirely correct, but at least we know there is some character in front of the space. And also over here we have the leading space, so this one is okay, same as the first one. But then this one, well, here we have the 5, 6 spaces, so it still was a bit fuzzy, and you don't exactly know how what's in there. So the next thing we would do is we would extend it, and we add base 64 encoding to see if there's a difference between the string and the encoded string. And over here we can see that in the backend, Custo does see, hey, there's a difference in all of these 5 strings, but it doesn't represent them well. So I was thinking, well, maybe if we turn the base 64 encoded string back to its original form to see if it might work. So over here I did a base 64 decode of the string, but then it still doesn't show the whole string. So does anyone have an idea how we can still sort this out? That would be an option if we replace the white space in the string. And another option would also be if we use, for instance, PowerShell to decode it. Or there's also a tool called CyberChef, which is really nice to encode and decode stuff. Regex.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. How does regex work with this?
That's a good one. Let's see. Where can we do a match? Where? Let me check the docs for the right regex.
Here, ChatGPT writes excellent regex.
No. Okay, so we can use regex in count-of, extract, matches regex. Okay. So let's do matches regex. Matches regex. Okay, being a bit lazy. Okay, so where D64 matches regex /s, I guess. Okay, so these contain space. So I want to see 2 till 6 spaces. Okay, but so we have this one and this one. So also regex can see it. And also when we do, for instance, to see if the string contains a certain value, for instance, if it's string, then it's okay. And if we do space string, then the second one is true, and double space string, then. So the backend knows, but the GUI doesn't. And if you're working on a parser or you're building detection logic, you want to make sure that the order of your text is right. And also what I wanted to show is in CyberChef, it would be easy to do from base 64. And then over here, you can see, hey, there's these characters. And also the good thing is if you select certain bits, then it shows you what is where. Oh, let's see. Jörg and Peter are typing. What if the spaces are in the middle of the text? So that's, for instance, this bit. You have text spaces text. Is that what you're meaning, Jörg? If you want to identify white space, maybe encode as hex. Yeah. Also, depending on your, hex would also be an option. So we could encode the string to hex. So hex. Let's see. Extend hex is to hex and now to hex. And then the original. Original. Expected to be long or int. Okay. So for hex, I guess I need a int or a long. And Peter says if it's just a GUI problem, though, I think the whitespace replacement would be my personal preference. But it is a GUI problem, but if you're counting on the values on your screen to build your detections, then it's nice to have the right value. And also if you have, for instance, over here, if we do extend include string text. Okay, so it does show the leading space. That would work. And if we do include, oh, that's really weird. When I was testing, it didn't came out like this, but if you do it from the GUI, then it works. But that's also a way to solve this. But then you still, it's a bit, it can be a bit strange. So I would say encode it, decode it, however you like, and then it can be seen. And also, yeah, if you have other characters like Unicode spaces or other Unicodes, you can use the base 64, or you can also use regex, because on the regex page you have the library, and in the library are all the options which you can use to filter on regex. Oh, Unicodes. You have the Unicodes where you can do /p or /u for a special character, and also white space, or was it? Well, there are several ways to get the white spaces. Let's see.
Like Tess said, I'd go for ChatGPT.
Yeah, in the end, ChatGPT is meant to be chatty and not to sort all these things, but it would be nice. Let's see, Andrea still is typing. Yeah, Andrea said you're very optimistic to try regex in a live stream. I know it's regex is something you need to do a lot, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Well, that's my part of the nice things of KQL. So I think we can go to the next subject.
Yeah, let me switch, because
Are
I
you?
know Thijs would never do that, so I'm gonna do it for him. So here's Thijs, and Thijs is an awesome guy, contributing. For those who don't know that book, it's called the M365 Security for the IT Pro ebook. And for the older ones amongst us, previously there was the also the ebook from Tony Redmond and from Michael van Horenbeek on Office 365, which is also a very great resource. But now for all the security fans among us, there is this security book. And the cool thing is, unlike other books that you buy and then once you've read them, they might end up in a cabinet. This book is regularly updated. I don't know how often, I think every month or 2 months.
Every
or so.
month, yes.
Yeah, yeah. In addition to all the blog posts and latest news that come from Microsoft itself, if you're interested in how real world practitioners, think about the tools, and also, sometimes the limitations or best practices, strongly recommend you take a look at that book. So yeah, and for the rest, I leave the introduction to yourself, Thijs.
All right, thank you so much for having me as well. So I'm from Belgium. I work for a company called The Collective Consulting. We're an MSSP located in Belgium as well, a team of 20 at the moment, focusing on everything Microsoft security. And within the company, my role is twofold. I am the team lead of our Security Operations Center, which will protect the customers from all of the incidents we see, both generated by Microsoft products and non-Microsoft products. And I'm also a security consultant, so focusing on Microsoft Sentinel primarily, but also Microsoft Defender, and a bit of everything, to be honest. So really happy to be here today and to be invited. The goal was to talk about automation and how we can use automation as well, and use KQL and automation. It's something which I try to heavily use in our own SOC as well, because nobody wants to look into 50 informative sign-in incidents each day. We want to automate it as much as possible, and that's also where I want to go today, is look into, okay, how can we take first steps into automation, but also how can we, if we get to that, create really, really complex LogicApps, which might be too complex, with all the KQL, and also share some of my experience on what you should do in LogicApps and how we can try to make it as efficient and easy as possible. So I prepared a demo, which I want to do. I just wrote down the steps. I didn't want to prepare too much, because then you can also see me struggle and then see what you might run into as well. But if you have anything to add or to ask, or you want to check anything, feel free to just interrupt me. I have the chat open right here, so we can also do really interactive sessions and talk about maybe your challenges. So let me just pull up my test environment right here. try to share the screen. So if everything is correct, you should now see the screen. So of course, automation, if we're talking about, I'm talking about context of Sentinel, because in my opinion, the Defender is really lacking in terms of automation. Sentinel was where it's set because it lost more triggers and integrations into other systems. So I always do all of my automation in Sentinel. And most of the time, I will even set up Sentinel just to do the automation, just because it provides so vast experience in what we can do, which you simply don't have when you're just using Defender. So just going to go to LogicApps because the automation is done on LogicApps. I think you all know that probably. So I will just create a sample LogicApp for us to use. Which we can play around with. Maybe really quickly, plan type, standard versus consumption. Consumption has always been there. It's based on how many actions you use. It's really cheap if you don't run it constantly. And it's great to start out with. Why would you care about standard? Standard has a higher SLA, integration into private networks. So using private endpoints to not have your calls routed over the internet. And it's also not in a shared service. So the compute is completely reserved for you. So Microsoft will say it's more secure because the resources are shared. I tend to always start off with consumption just because a standard costs like, I think it's $150 a month to start off with, which is a really high cost if you're just getting started. So go with consumption unless you have really clearly use cases to go with standard. So just going to create one. And let's hope Azure is pretty fast today, so we don't lose a lot of time waiting for it to load. Okay, there we go. So we have the LogicApp. I assume everybody knows LogicApp, so I won't go into much detail, but if there's any basics I skipped, feel free to just put something in chat and interrupt me. So just going to start off with a blank LogicApp. And then I'm going to look into Sentinel integration because what I want to do is pull information from Sentinel, from an incident, do enrichment with raw data, and then just push it out again. So as the example, that's why I use Sentinel and also use Sentinel as a foundation. So a LogicApp, of course, has a trigger and an action. A trigger means when should it run? The action is what will it execute? So we need to pick the trigger first. Right now, we have 3 of them. And it all depends on which scope you want to use for the automation. So a entity, that's the smallest scope. That's one user, one device, one IP address. It's really specific. An alert is, of course, an alert in Sentinel, and 1 or more alerts can be jumped into an incident. I tend to use all 3 of them because I do still believe there's use cases for all of them. It's important to know that Microsoft is heavily favoring the incident trigger and not showing enough love, in my opinion, to the alert trigger. So that's important to know if you're just starting out. I do still see use cases for the alert trigger, but there's not much done anymore in terms of it. You see a lot of going into the incident trigger. I'm going to start off with an entity trigger. Why is that? Because it's really scoped into one single user, and we do that to use manual actions. So if we are investigating a certain incident and we see, okay, this user has a primary authentication is breached, we need to reset the passwords. We can manually run that entity-based trigger because then it will be in the context of one single account. And we can really scope that password reset into one single account. So just picking it, and then we can choose the account type. So we're talking about an IP URL file hash. I'm going to check account. And then we have the information coming in. So that's, of course, the first step. Then I click on the next step. And we can dive into KQL right away. If you want to use KQL, you need to use I think it's the log, and I always miss, it's the log analytics connector. And once it loads, we can pick this one. It's with the little arrows. That's the one. Crap, it's a send data. Great start. So that one was to send data into log analytics. If we want to retrieve data, it's going to be this one, I think, but I'll scroll down. Yeah, look here, we have run query and list results. And here we can run the query. So first it needs a few configuration steps. The easiest thing would be to use the drop-down arrows and just choose the correct subscription and everything from Sentinel. That's a bit tricky in my opinion. What you could also use is if you go to the default values, you can also search for normally subscription. Okay, let me quickly change something up because I'm not doing a very good job here. That's not available in the entity trigger, it seems. It will be available in the incident trigger. So if I choose subscription, I have the subscription ID. And that's really easy because then you can also just export it, and it has a lot more flexibility. Resource type, of course, is log analytics for application insights. We're talking about Sentinel, so we're going to be choosing log analytics workspace, and then the resource name is we need the workspace name of Sentinel, and then we have the query right here. So this is your regular old KQL query. There's really not much differences compared to running it yourself in the Sentinel UI. Only big difference, of course, is that it doesn't support any IntelliSense. So there's no IntelliSense, there's no checking if the query is correct. You would need to run it first in the portal, see if it's all running fine, and then only then move it into the LogicApp. So right here as well, because I chose the dynamic input, it will not allow me to select a time range from the dropdown. If we do it manually, we will be able to choose one. So I will quickly do it manually just to show you. I need to create the query first. Like 10. So now it should provide dropdown of what I want to use. It's important to know that these are built in. What we can always do is at the bottom select like last 14 days. And that will also work. It doesn't matter if you choose dropdown or not. It's a free text field and you can choose whatever you want. So we can save that and now we can run it. I will quickly update the trigger again to the entity-based trigger to show it, and we can run it, how it would look like. Like this. Okay, so now if we go into Sentinel, there is a couple of ways to run that playbook. Either we go into the incident, and I can go into a newly created incident, and I can hope the entity is configured there. Let me show this with an example if I have one. A explicit MFA deny, that will work perfectly. So right here we have an explicit MFA deny. We have the entity, my colleague Glenn. I can click on that, and then from there I can click Run Playbook, and I can check the one I just created. What is interesting as well is you're not limited to if the user is within a incident. You can also go to the entity behavior page, search for any username right here, open that page, then you're in the same page that we just navigated through the incidents. That's, in my opinion, one of the big advantages of using that entity-based trigger, because you're not limited to having an entity within an incident. You can just always execute the actions. And we often need this within the SOC because there will be, for example, an email reported by an end user, and MDO has not seen the email as malicious at all. But still one user has reported it. We go to investigate, and it looks like it's malicious. Maybe 5 different users have clicked that URL, but there's no incident at all. And at that point, we need to be able to reset a password, for example. And by using that entity-based trigger, we can make sure we do that because we can just look up the user, any user, then click Run Playbook, select the one we want, and then it's running. So we can go into our LogicApp, and in the run history, we should see the run right here, and we can see it has succeeded in a second. So right away, we can click on it, and we can see everything which happens. We can see the query, and we can also see the entire output. As you can see, this is just regular output from using, like you would in Sentinel. So a lot of information, all of the columns you would expect, just like in Sentinel. So this is just another GUI to run your KQL from. Now, of course, this is a really simple query. What we can do, of course, is we can integrate the context of what we're running it on and look for specific information. For example, if I would like to look for only sign logs from the user I run the query against or I run the playbook against, I can go where user principal name equals. Then we can use the dynamic inputs of the trigger to find the user principal name. Now, one of the examples we could use is we could see more, and we can scroll until we find the user principal name. But what's sometimes easier is just run the playbook once, look into the results. Apologies, I'm just going to quickly open up the results. Then you can see what the output is. And that's really easy because then you don't have to guess what the output will be. But you can open it up, click show raw outputs. And then you can see is that we have, for example, the user ID, display name, but we also have the UPN name. So this we can use. We now know, okay, the value is called UPN, and we can use that for our next steps. I see a question in the chat, which is a really interesting one. I think that's also a pretty big discussion. It's about playbooks versus notebooks if you're doing analysis on entities. I tend to focus on playbooks just because they're. But I think the use case is different, to be honest. Let's start there. Playbooks are more meant for a automated response, which will be the same almost all of the time. While I feel that a notebook is more meant for interactions, running one query, seeing what is the output, and then running through them one by one, and also adding intelligence. For me, a notebook is like a semi-automated flow, where we have all the building blocks, but the analyst will still go in and manually execute things, while a playbook is fully automated and it's the same flow you'll run every time. So that's my opinion. And just the entry level for playbooks is much lower compared to the entry level for notebooks. I think also the cost is really different between the two. So I tend to stick with playbooks, certainly for actions, just as we're building here. So we got into the outputs. We now know, okay, the UPN is and UPN name. What we can now do is we can search dynamic content, UPN name. Oh, crap, we only have UPN suffix. Maybe it's for user principal name. We don't have it as well. And this is really annoying. We can see the UPN name is right there, but the connection between Sentinel and LogicApps doesn't give it. It's not like we're limited to what Microsoft is providing us right here. We can get a little bit hacky and reference the content ourselves. How can we do that? We can select one ourselves, like UPN suffix, and then we can see it's going into the entity, then the properties, and then getting UPN suffix. So remember, entity, properties, UPN suffix. If we do the same, it's entity, properties, UPN suffix. It's the same thing we're using. So we need to go one step further into additional data and then choose UPN. So what we can do is I tend to just copy this output, paste it, and then we have the expression being used, which is just referencing the information we got from the trigger. If you copy this, you need to remove the first few parts and remove the last one. And then we can just update it like you would update any JSON. So I think it's additional data, question mark, UPN suffix. Just need to check the exact writing if I'm being correct. Additional data without a capital, and this is camel case. Okay. Additional data, UPN suffix. So this should be good to go. So right now you see it's not with the lovely icon from Sentinel. It's simpler. But if we save this and we run the playbook again, I hope this live demo goes well, we should be able to see it. So I usually keep two screens open, one with the designer to develop the Logic app, one with the output. So I can go back into the output, refresh it right here. Great, it's filled. So now we can open it, and you can see it seems that the it's getting against an empty value. So I don't think our expression worked right here. So we can also see how the KQL has errored out. Yeah, just because there is an empty space. So we need to go back. What's going wrong here? Properties, additional data. Oh, UPN name. I was getting suffix, right? So this should be good to go. So if you're debugging a Logic app, you can either run it all the time through the Sentinel UI, or you can also just resubmit it and have the output. Christoph, you had an interesting question there, how to document the results of an incident. For example, if you're doing enrichment, where do you put it? I'll get back to you on that once we progress. I think it's also a discussion I'm currently having, and I'm gonna probably revamp our entire automation setup because we're progressing on our automation as well. So just checking the run again, it failed again, great. But I think anybody sees what is wrong right here? Not gonna go further into the error, but anybody see what's wrong? Yeah. Christoph is really fast.
Yeah, percent.
It's something I often forget, to be honest, because if you're using that custom inputs, you might not think about it, but that is indeed really important. So right now, I will get the output, and you should see my sign-ins if it wants to load. Yeah, so yeah, user it's all text. So right here. So this is correct. This is really simple, right? I think everybody knows how to do this. Where it gets tricky, in my opinion, and the integration is more complex. It's what can we now do with that data? How can we get that output and actually do something useful with it? And I know that's also a discussion we had with Alex yesterday while prepping the show. How will you use the output of the KQL and all of the complexity that Microsoft adds? Because if we're talking about outputs, at this time, the Logic app doesn't know what output should I expect from this step. He has no idea. So what can we do to solve that? We can add an additional step. We can add data operations and then do parse JSON. So parse JSON, what it will do, it will get the content from the previous step. So we click value, that will be the output of the previous step. And then it requires a schema. So that's a JSON schema in terms of what objects does it expect. How does it work? We can do a simple payload generation. I'll do a sample right here. Imagine this is our JSON. Key value. Really simple. It will just have an object with one property key, and the type of that value will be string. If I go a step further now, I want to use it outputs. For For example, I want to, I don't know, what I will do is I will use a step called compose, because a compose step, it's used for, I use it for debugging. You can just implement everything as a text field and it will print it out in the run history. And that's an easy way to do debugging in LogicApps as well. So as you can see right here, now it provides me with the key. So I provided the schema and now I can use that key right here. You could create those schemas yourselves. What I mostly do, as I'm lazy, I run it once, I copy all of the outputs and go into the LogicApp and I paste it. And now automatically Microsoft will generate that JSON for me. I think that's probably how most people do it, right?
Yeah, what if I may ingest, because I can tell you, I've spent hours in front of just this screen. What I noticed, there is one scenario where this can be tricky, and that is if in this definition, if you scroll down below, it will also define some required attributes. And if then your data isn't consistent and some data is missing on the top, the whole thing will fail.
Yeah.
And that actually happened once to me with the playbook. It has always run. It ever ran 6 months, and suddenly it didn't do, and that was because suddenly something changed here. And then actually a good friend of mine in the company told me, "Hey, be careful with your required attributes there."
Yeah, it gets tricky, and I know what you mentioned yesterday as well is if the risk level, for example, that's type string, if it's a null, it won't be of type string because it's null, and it will fill out as well. And I'm really happy you brought it up because, well, this is the easiest way to do it. It's also probably the worst way to do it. I think it's a great starting point, but the parsing of JSON should be really limited to only the data you need.
Yeah.
So it's good to just generate that data, but what I like to do is I can copy the schema. I will quickly change the sharing to my entire screen so you can see my Notepad++. You can copy the schema and you can change it yourself. So if you don't want the property, you can just remove it. But of course, like Alex said, you need to be careful with the removals because there's also the required properties. So you also need to remove the properties from the required. But you should only have the properties, the output you need right here. So you should really think about, okay, what kind of output would I need within the context of my LogicApp? What kind of columns do I need? And then go from there.
I also think it makes it more readable, right? If friends and colleagues look at your playbook and we're already overwhelmed with all these ARM templates or bicep tomorrow, but still, it's like in any other code, everything unnecessarily will make life easier.
Yeah, exactly, because this is right here. This is already almost 300 lines. So if we have this for like 3 or 4 times, it will just blow up the ARM template, like you say, and it's really difficult to then troubleshoot it. So what is also, of course, an option is that we limit the output of a KQL query. We could say project, let's do user principal name, I think IP address, application, location, the device details. And then I think if we run this one, I will rerun it again to get the output of the queries. I hope I had those column names correct. No, I didn't. Good job. I think application doesn't exist in a Sentinel log table, probably.
No, find app or yeah.
It's yeah. App display name. It's gonna be that one.
Yeah.
So this should wrong again. Device details. Isn't that not?
You have a
properties or-
dynamic and a string device details.
Yeah. I'm happy you have caught that as well. It gave me a really big headache once I found that out. I think the dynamic, it's in the sign logs table, but the string is in the non-interactive sign logs table, if I'm not mistaken. It's the right detail, not details.
I'm happy to see that you're no different than me.
Okay, so yeah, of course, it now failed the validation. Why is that? Because we updated so many required properties and we trimmed down the outputs. So I will get this again. Let's generate the schema again. And then we can take actions. So I jumped to Hoop just a bit because I talked about it compose step, right? And that's to do logging. What is useful in LogicApp and not that useful is the way it will code for you. So for example, we just created a query which will generate or which will get 10 sign-ins back because we did or it gets all the sign-ins back, so multiple sign-ins, and we did the schema, and in the schema you will see this is an array, and that array has objects. And because LogicApps know it's an array, if we select either one of the outputs, we will get into, for example, location. It will automatically create for each for us, which is handy, but at the same time, I have really struggled with that sometimes, because what if we do a take one, for example? And so we only want to have one result. Even if you do that, the output will still be an array with objects. So we will still be faced with the same struggle. What I like to do there is I will use the expressions and I will say, I have the array value with all the values, but I want to get the first value. And I will do first of the value. And that will remove the fact that I need to have that array in there. So now we can update the schema ourselves. And if I try to update the schema, we can remove the array right here. And then we should remove this. So this should have the correct payload. And then we can move actually the outputs from the for each and drop it right here. So this should not create it, right? Because we just updated that schema. And hopefully, right, it should only return one location if I did everything correctly. Yeah, so yeah, BE because I'm logging in from Belgium. So that's a trick I heavily use, and it's because during enrichment, you mostly want to get really focused data back. Things like how many times have I logged in from an IP address, or how many times have I logged in general, or with MFA, or without MFA, or failed MFA, or failed the password. Those are all summarized queries are right, and then I have one line returning all of the data. And I know I don't want to loop over it. So that's why I use that first to jump out of those loops. It makes it a little bit complex to do that, but it helps really a ton. And I'm glad Andrea finds it useful as well to use it, because that's where we get, in my opinion, to the biggest pain points of LogicApps. It's loops. You can have really, really complex LogicApps, and if you're starting to get a lot of results from KQL inside of that LogicApp, it will get really complex, because we'll revert back to the previous scenario. So Control Z, schema value. Imagine if now we want to reason over that data, and let's say What could we use? We could say, I want to see all of the sign-in logs where the location is not Belgium. Let's take it for that. To see, okay, am I logging in from a place which is out of the ordinary? Stupid example, but it should provide us with something to go for. So I will select condition. What do you want to compare? I want to create the location, and then of course it creates that for each for us, right? Because we know we provided it with an array that we should expect, and then go with BE, and that should do the comparison. So I'll do a compose as well to just provide the output for debugging, and let's choose the IP address right here. So for each of the conditions, we will return the IP address. If I'm going too fast or too slow, please feel free to let me know. I can adapt if that's needed. Now, let's hope I logged in from another country today. I'm not sure, to be honest. So
Give me your password.
You need to try to find it, Johnny. So 133 logins. Okay, so as an example, it's going to be a lot of the same IP address because I'm using a proxy, so probably all over the place. I will be in the same proxy. But so this is easy, right? I can get the IP address once I look into the location, and that's an easy example. But as you can see, it gets pretty complex already. Imagine if now we want to compare the IP address. I can create another condition to compare the IP address is equal to, and I can add a logging as well. So you can see your logic app gets quite complex with lots of loops, and where it goes wrong, in my opinion, is where you start to compare two arrays. Imagine if you have two separate arrays. Let's say we want to compare, for example, the sign-in logs compared to the Office activity. We would have an array results of the sign-in logs and an array results of the Office activity. If we would want to do comparisons between the two, it would be a for each and a for each, and it would loop everything within each other. So it would be a loop for each, and then we're really comparing things in an effective manner. And that's really where it starts wrong. And I think the biggest thing I run into is don't try to build your logic within the automation, but really try to build it within KQL. I think we all know how powerful KQL is. We can do every comparison we want to do in KQL. So I tend to try to put as much logic into KQL, and I like to have it more complex in the logic app. Because as Christophe said as well, a logic app can fail out of nowhere once there is a special character or once schema fails or whatever. So the more complexity you build, the trickier it gets and the more failure rate you're going to have. And I think as an example, I want to show a logic app which I want built, and it was meant to check the user activity. So get all of the information about the user. And I hope my screen will be large enough if it wants to load. So this seems easy, right? But then we loop over the accounts, and these are all the queries I have created. And you can see there's so many different queries to retrieve the data. So what I had is I had some queries which I wanted to run. For example, which audit log activity was happening around the incident. I would run that, and then I would compose it and add, for example, the first row into it. And then that would be also put into an array with an output, which I will return and use. So this is already really complex. You can see how large it gets. You need to scroll sideways, downwards, and upwards. But once you have that data, then it gets worse because it's really difficult to reason over that data. I hope I have the correct version right here. So what the setup of this LogicApp was is you had one LogicApp unfamiliar sign-in, and that was going to be calling different modules. So for example, we had the IP enrichment model, the user activity model, the user info module. And simple enough, the user activity module would just retrieve everything the user was doing. But then we had to check. One check is the activity from the user in the same location as the home location of the user. So we had output from two modules. We had the user info module and we had the user activity module. And then we had to combine the two. So this is an example of how that looks like. We need to loop all of the IP addresses, loop all the accounts, loop all the IPs, then check the alert, have another condition to check the location, and then have another condition to execute a few other actions to run a successful check if it's a successful sign-in after that. And you can see it's condition win, condition win, condition. And that's it's where, in my opinion, LogicApps fail and they come short because it gets really complex. So that's why I have built a few more complex KQL queries to use in the automation. I think, let me show you one which I just created last week, focused on email reporting. So in the SOC as well, end users can report emails and we will investigate them just with the native Microsoft tooling. But of course, end users are really not reliable, as we can say it like that, to identify phishing. If they receive a spam email or something suspicious, they just report it. So it provides a really hefty load on our SOC. So we created a mail reporting LogicApp, which will actually do enrichment based on the email reporting incidents. And this is also pretty long LogicApp. But one example is I created a KQL query to enrich the email URLs. So we will get all of the email URLs from the email. We will see if the user clicked on the email, if anybody else in the organization clicked on the URL, how many users have clicked on the URL, how many users have clicked on the URL from the same domain. So many different things, and the query gets quite complex. But if you need to have different steps in the LogicApp to all execute that subsequent query, it gets, it's too much in my opinion. So I tend to push as much complexity in KQL as I want. And a fun fact, if you're using Defender for Office 365, the email entity page, as you all know and love, it's currently bugged and not all URLs are visible. Sometimes there is a URL in the email and it's not visible in the email entity page, but it is visible in KQL through advanced hunting. So that's another advantage of using KQL. I'm looking into some of the questions. Andrea, the playbook, indeed, it was based on stats. So on the Sentinel triage assistant, and that's the same thing that Microsoft kind of has built. It's using those modules because you create so much complexity on the LogicApp, and you don't want to recreate all of that LogicApps and just copy paste it into different things. So the idea of the modules is you create reusable codes like you would in a PowerShell function and call them. And I kind of use it because, as you can see, I use the base module, so that's entirely stolen from the stats. But I use the I created my own module just because I wanted to have additional things which were not available at that time. But I think the idea of having that Sentinel triage assistant, those reusable modules, it's awesome because anybody can pick them up, deploy them, and just use them in the organization as you want. Then a question from Christoph on the use case for a entity-based trigger based on the URL. I think you're talking about the mail reports playbook, right, Christoph? So why did I not use a entity trigger there, but I used a incident trigger? I did not use the entity trigger because I wanted to be automated. For each incident we get, I want to automatically run the enrichment and add it as a information within our investigation tool. So that's why I didn't use the entity-based trigger, because that's a manual trigger. Why did I not use the alert-based trigger? It's because every alert generated from Microsoft Defender and synchronized through that bidirectional sync, it's not supported for the alert trigger. So it'll actually not trigger LogicApps with an alert trigger. Really inconvenient. That's the only possible way. So that's why I use the incident trigger, because it's the only thing you can use at that time. So just going back into the LogicApp, what I wanted to showcase, and I think I owed Christoph some explanation on how I integrated within the incident. So I will quickly switch this up from an incident trigger to from an entity trigger to an incident trigger, because of course it's the incident which has the comments. So we will always add the comments to the incident. So this will fail because the output of it is completely different. So I will cheat and just hard code it right here. Of course, we can also retrieve this by also looking into the entities. But what we do most of the time is we will push it back as a comment. So we can do add a comment. We provide the incident ARM ID. If we search for it, it will have the incident ARM ID. And then this is the message. Here you can get the outputs. And for example, we can, let's just push it in here. So we put it in the for each. So right now I have it for each of the IP addresses, and I can say, okay, please add the IP address as a comment. So for every sign-in I made, I will push the IP address. Really stupid example, but this will now create a comment for each of the sign-ins I did. Know that this is entirely also possible to use HTML code. So if you want to format it, you can add your own HTML code. There's no GUI or help for this, but it is possible. The issue I have with this, and let me just show it with an example as well. We will go into the incidents. I will have to get the incident from my colleague. I can click incident actions on a playbook, and I can manually trigger that. So this is the one that will run. It will take a while, of course, because it needs to loop through all of those results from the KQL query and add them as a comment. So this will take some time, but if we look into the activity log, we should see the comments being posted right here. Yeah, so this is all extremely noisy. If you're having a mature SOC, you will have multiple ways of enrichment. For example, you have enrichment about the IP, the URLs, the mail, the accounts, the activity of that account, the activity of that IP, activity about previous incidents for the same entities. And we used to add them all as comments. So every part of enrichment that was a comment, and we're just bombarding our analysts with comments. What the issue there is that you're just scrolling through comments at that time. And it's easily to be missed, and it's also the order of the comments can change depending on when the playbook is executed, so it's really unclear where you can find the correct information. So what we are doing right now is we are using Atlassian Jira for our ITSM tools, so for SOC investigations, and we're building custom screens with a custom field for every enrichment we want to do, to make sure that each of the enrichments have their own place within the incident, and the SOC analyst knows, okay, if I want to look for the enrichment about the IP, I need to go into this screen, and this is right where it will be, and we can really control that look and feel of the incident investigation experience. So it's perfectly fine to start off with comments at the beginning, but it is important to keep in mind that if you're progressing further, comments might not be the best idea. You need to look into a custom representation using a custom tool. At the moment, the Sentinel investigation experience, it lacks customization. It's not possible to add your own custom fields or change anything in the UI. So it's not possible to do anything natively in Sentinel, unfortunately. That's also the main reason why I suggest customers to use an additional tool, use a third-party tool, because most of the third-party tools will have the option to tweak the UI and add things of your own. So you have full and complete control over the incident experience.
Thijs, you can also generate a log analytics table and store all your results in the log analytics table.
Yes, and I love that you say that, because we do that as well, because it also allows you to kind of map, how should I say this? What we tend to do is we have a alert. Let's say I have an unfamiliar sign-in. We in the company, we use Zscaler as a proxy. So it has, we know with a certain confidence that if an unfamiliar sign-in is coming from Zscaler, it has a lower chance of being a false positive. The issue is natively, that's information about the ISP of an IP address. It's not in log analytics, so we cannot query it. So what we do is we run the enrichment based on the alerts, get all of the information, push it back into log analytics. Then we have a second rule in Sentinel, which will take the original security alerts, combine it, join it with the enrichment we pushed, and use that enriched information to check, should I create an incident for this unfamiliar sign-in, or should I ignore it? And that's an awesome use case to indeed use again the benefits of KQL, the benefits of log analytics, to make sure you just push it to your own format. Then you have complete control over it. So I know I talked quite a bit. I'm thinking if I forgot anything important right here. I think it's easy to use the custom content in the log analytics settings, right? You can just choose everything you want. What is important, of course, is that the data quality is the data quality you have. And lots of the time, for example, the UPL or display name will be in capital letters, while KQL will be in lowercase, or the sign-in logs will be in lowercase or in uppercase. So it's really important to also mind about that. We don't have full control over what Sentinel is throwing at us. So be mindful and know that you can just go with to lower as you would do in KQL and update the data that way. So I think I'm coming to the end of what I wanted to really talk about. I don't know the specific things we want to add or discuss or have questions about.
I do have a question.
Okay, bring it on.
Do you cheat with Azure automation with runbooks? Do you use them in your Logic app, or do you mainly stick to the Logic apps themselves?
At the moment, we don't have any automation accounts running in production. No, I need to be honest. We don't use automation accounts. We use Azure Functions. So we use Azure Functions. It's the same for PowerShell, because at some point it will be just much easier to write 2 lines of code instead of getting a really complex logic apps, and nobody is happy for that. So I would not stay away from it as well. If the use case is there, the use case is there. And every customer who's starting out with Sentinel automation, I tend to also push them to have support for Azure Functions or automation accounts in the future, just because you will have that kind of use case in the future.
Yeah.
So for those that are watching, can you maybe name some use cases? So just for the people to have some imagination, when would you use an Azure function?
Can I show an example? There's one example I have, and it's if you're using the Log Analytics API. I don't know if anybody uses that API to retrieve data. What is annoying there is that the output, it's not a key value. You get an array of the column names and you get an array of the results. And you cannot easily combine the two. And of course, it's possible through KQL, through LogicApps. Then you need to loop and loop and loop and combine different objects together. And that's what I said. We can write this in PowerShell in like 5 minutes. We don't want to have the complexity of doing those loops and conditions in the LogicApp. And that's where we built our first use case to say we will use Azure Functions. And that's also maybe an interesting point. I don't know how you feel about authentication, because natively, if we use the Log Analytics integration, there is not that much choice. We either have the possibility to sign in with the user account, which you don't want, of course, you don't want the user account, or we can sign in with a service principal. I am not a fan of both of them because I would much rather see managed entities. Managed entities can be enabled with every LogicApp and allows you to authenticate within the LogicApp yourselves. Unfortunately, there's no way to have a managed entity authentication with the built-in connector. And that's where we need to pivot into the API. So the example I showed, do I still have it open? The user activity one. If you might have noticed, it's all using that Log Analytics API, just because we wanted to use, right here, we wanted to use the managed entity to do the authentication. So that's just one annoying thing at the moment. I do really hope that Microsoft will implement managed entities natively.
It's promised.
Oh, is it promised? Okay, that's the great news because I hadn't heard that one actually. And that will simplify our lives because the output of that API, it just sucks if you want to use it. Let's be honest, it's really difficult to get the correct outputs, and you need to use the indexes of the columns and the rows, and it gets really complex. So that's why I still see a lot of use within this connector because it's kind of formats the output into what we want. But if you say it's on the way, I hope it will be really, really soon.
I believe I read even in the public forum something about it because we're not the first ones who would like to see it. And yeah, to be honest, until then, we go with a service principal and at least in consulting and tell our customers when we leave the building that they should take care of the service principal's password.
Yeah, because that's the struggle, right? Is that password which will once need to be renewed and also just keeps floating around. I'm hopeful.
Oh, no, awesome. First of all, happy to see people having the same challenges. I also had an inside laugh when you copied the expression. I always also end up, and I think if I had one wish for those in charge of the Playbook UI and designer is, just let me pick on the right side the data I want, because I feel anytime I run into a new scenario, I spend way too long decapsulating the JSON, figuring out, making my typos like you did. Yeah.
Yeah, and as an example, I actually worked on this password reset LogicApp with my colleague today, and he's working way too late because I still see runs. So I will need to tell him that. But an example, if you see in the runs, it's really easy to say, okay, this has run this action, and this hasn't run. But what is really confusing is that this condition, you would say, okay, it hasn't run, so it's stopped right here. But if you click open, you can see, oh, wait, but these subsequent steps have run. You click this open, you will find that, okay, no, nothing has run, but then you need to really find out where it stopped, and you can see, okay, it stopped right here at the end. And that's I thought about that immediately when you said just the weird things with LogicApps. That's a weird experience which I would prefer not to have.
By the way, maybe worth mentioning, especially those that care about Sentinel Health. Now we can, if you also enable, and you might not per se want to do that for every playbook that you have, if you have a lot, but enabling the diagnostic settings on the playbook itself can also be interesting to actually, learn a little bit more about, the steps that they executed, etc.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, I don't have it enabled in this test environment, so I cannot show it, unfortunately. Is there
if you go to a playbook itself, so it's a little bit distinct. You have the Sentinel health, but for the playbook health, you basically could go here, and when you add a diagnostic setting, you will see that you can basically do some variables logging as well. So if you really care about certain steps, or let's say, you want to get an audit log of certain things, you could do it there. Yeah. And
this is then even, I think that's Microsoft. I won't have any data, but as indeed you mentioned, Alex, if you have it Azure Diagnostics, you will see the failures. And in my opinion,
there's also a playbook workbook for it's funny, right now we have like 4 different health workbooks. So if you just type in health, I think there's 4 of them. Yeah.
5 even.
So you see also playbook health monitoring.
But in my opinion, not having a audit or having active monitoring of playbooks which fail, it's unacceptable to me, because you will create quite a big dependency on those playbooks if you reset the password, isolate the device. It's really important to have it, so you should at least have it. This is the question from Christoph as well about the cost of Azure Functions. So Azure Functions, it can also run consumption-based, and at that time, it's also really cheap because the first few runs or the first few seconds are free. So if you run it like once or twice a day or 10 times a day, it won't cost you anything. It's only if you have a bigger usage or you go from consumption to server-based that the cost that you will incur will be quite big. So I see another question coming up from Peter as well. Thank you. Have a great evening. Any more questions, things you want to find out about, things you want to chat about?
Okay, well, otherwise, I think they know where to find you.
Exactly.
And otherwise, if there's interest, we can always organize maybe a follow-up session. Good. So thanks for that. And then because we want to stick a little bit to our time, let me take over, and I'm going to keep this short. So what did you do with KQL? So as you might know, Microsoft for many years have been telling us that certain PowerShell modules are going to be depreciated, especially the MS Online, for those of us who have been with Office 365 since a while. And we all know that, MS Online has always been there, and although they tried to force us into the Azure AD module, we have to still use MS Online because MS Online exposed certain properties that, for example, the newer PowerShell modules wouldn't do. Nevertheless, it's all over. MS Online and the Azure AD and Azure Preview are considered to be depreciated, which means they might work, but Microsoft might do backend changes and then they won't work anymore. So you are encouraged to change to the Microsoft Graph PowerShell module. Now, that brought me actually to an idea, because, you can preach across your customers or within your company, like, please don't use them. But yeah, people just continue to use them, or they are not aware that they have certain automation scripts. So that brought me to the idea of, let's develop some KQL queries to find those command legs that are embedded in those PowerShell modules. I'm quickly going to share my full screen, because otherwise that's not going to work to show that. So the solution is quite easy. Basically, I wrote this PowerShell script many years ago. And what this PowerShell script is doing, it's basically generating this KQL query for you. And back in the days, I, of course, wrote this PowerShell script to automatically generate a KQL query that, for example, would find all PowerSploit command legs. Or anything else. So the usage is quite easy. Load the function and then simply run new KQLCafe module functions, export. You can either provide the module file, so if you don't feel like installing a module, but you have it laying around somewhere, and then simply specify the path. If you don't specify a path, it will go into the clipboard. And what you basically get is, in this case, I provided the Azure AD Preview PowerShell module, and in this example, the MS Online. So if you're just looking for those two, you can basically grab the KQL query, execute it, and you will probably, as I did, find those people that are still executing those command legs on their devices. And yeah, tell them that somewhere in June, I believe, it's all over with those two modules, or it should be over.
Or not.
Yeah, or maybe there's another delay and Microsoft will allow you to continue to use the module for another 3 months. Who knows? No, but seriously, I believe this has been announced way well enough ahead, so people have time to make a change. Yeah. Good, Johnny. Anything more from your end?
I had this query I was showing last night, but it's not completely done yet. But I can show it as part of inspiration.
Yeah, or otherwise, let's keep that for the next time, and then we go into a working query.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm working on some correlation between MFA registration and Azure AD risk alerts, but during the join, I get a ton of records for one entry, so I'm still working to clean it up a bit. So I'll show that next month.
The silent logs are so annoying, right, to work with, because you get so many different entries all at the same time. And I found that they're not even ordered correctly. So you would see, like, for example, MFA deny, MFA succeed, MFA deny. So you would think, okay, the sign failed. But if you look, it succeeded, but it's just ordered incorrectly. I have crushed on that a lot.
And also sometimes, for instance, if you have an adversary trying to log on and first failed on MFA, and then registers his own cell phone as a app, and then does a successful logon, then the risk is being removed from the account because MFA succeeded. And normally that's okay, but when an attacker registers his own phone, then it's not okay. So those are the edge cases you want to see, and that's also why we keep building KQL, because Microsoft does a really good thing at the 90%, but the last mile, specific for customers, we know the situation of the customer better than Microsoft, because we
Yeah.
know how the customers work because we speak with them. Very true.
That's like a case like Easter where everything looked almost okay, but that lady didn't have an iPhone 14. And that was already one of the differences we noticed because the attacker had one. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So yeah, next month I added the link for those new into the chat. Otherwise, you find us on www.kql.com here, where we always show the upcoming guests. So today we have Thijs again. Many thanks, Thijs, for joining. Really appreciated you took the time, and I really enjoyed your demonstrations here. And next month we actually have something very similar. So today, Thijs basically showed the use of KQL with LogicApps. Next month we'll have Clive Watson. And he's going to talk with us about the use of KQL within workbooks. We spoke about workbooks earlier last year, but yeah, it's all about repetition, right? Until we get it right. So we're going to spend another episode on KQL and the use of workbooks. Then we're also planning to have one in June. Then in July, we're going to take a break because then it's summer holidays here. And for the further sessions, we'll make the announcements when they come. If you or one of your colleagues has missed one of the shows, you can also find them back here, including the videos, links to the presenter, and I do my best on the show notes. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit behind on those. So yeah, and otherwise, as always, if you have an idea, if you have any comments, feedback, let us know. Or if you would like to present your work, always welcome. And otherwise, again, thanks, Thijs. Thanks for Johnny for being with us today in our KQLCafe. And thanks to all our listeners in real time or those that might listen to and watch the video later. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much for
Goodbye.
having me. Have a nice day.
Was
Bye.
awesome, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.